Rain tapped softly against the front windows of Harper's Hardware on a quiet Tuesday morning in the small town of Maple Creek, Oregon. The store had stood on the corner of Oak Street for almost 50 years, surviving chain stores, recessions, and changing times. Behind the worn oak counter, 62-year-old Daniel Harper carefully arranged handwritten receipts into a faded leather binder. He still believed every customer deserved a smile, every handshake meant something, and every promise should be honored. His father had built the store with those values. Now it was Daniel's turn to protect them. Just before lunch, the old brass bell above the door chimed. A young woman stepped inside, soaked from the rain despite her umbrella. She couldn't have been older than 26. She held a small envelope tightly in both hands as if it were the most important thing she owned. She looked around nervously before walking toward the counter. "Are you Mr. Harper?" Daniel smiled warmly. "I am." Her voice trembled. "My name is Emily Carter. My father was Thomas Carter." The smile faded gently from Daniel's face. Tom Carter. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in nearly 15 years. Emily swallowed hard. "My father passed away last month." Daniel lowered his head. "I'm so sorry." She nodded. "While cleaning out his things, I found something addressed to me." She slowly opened the envelope. It was a letter. Daniel listened quietly. He wrote that before he died, there was one debt he never managed to repay. She slid another folded piece of paper across the counter. "It says he borrowed $1,200 from Daniel Harper 23 years ago, and that I should repay it if I ever had the chance." She carefully placed a cashier's check on the counter. $1,200. Her eyes filled with tears. "My dad said it was the only unpaid promise he couldn't forgive himself for." The little hardware store became completely silent. Daniel stared at the check. Then at the young woman standing before him. He remembered everything. 23 years earlier, Tom Carter had walked through that same front door carrying a frightened 6-year-old daughter. Emily. She had been holding a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. Tom had looked exhausted. Embarrassed. Ashamed. His wife had undergone emergency surgery after a serious accident. Insurance hadn't covered everything. He had nowhere else to turn. "I hate asking," Tom had whispered. "I just need enough to keep my family together until I can get back to work." Daniel had never considered it a business loan. It was simply one father helping another. He had handed Tom the money without interest, without paperwork, and without any deadline. "Pay me back someday if life gives you the chance," Daniel had said. "If it doesn't, then help someone else when you're able." That was the entire agreement. Life, however, hadn't been kind to Tom. His wife's recovery lasted years. Medical bills piled higher. Jobs came and went. Daniel occasionally saw him around town, always working hard, always trying. Neither man ever mentioned the money again. Daniel reached for the check. Emily held her breath. He slowly pushed it back toward her. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I can't accept this." Emily blinked. "I don't understand. Your father already paid every penny." She frowned. "No, he wrote that he never did." Daniel smiled sadly. "Money isn't the only way people repay a debt." Emily looked confused. Daniel leaned against the counter. "Do you remember a winter night when you were about 10 years old?" She searched her memory. "There was a terrible snowstorm." Daniel nodded. "My wife, Susan, got stranded on Highway 18. Emily's eyes slowly widened. "My dad." "Yes." Daniel continued. "Tom recognized her car in the ditch. He spent nearly 2 hours helping pull it out with a neighbor's tractor." Emily whispered. "He never told me that. He never told anyone." Daniel smiled. He refused every dollar I offered him. Instead, Tom had simply laughed. You helped my family when nobody else would. Daniel continued. Then there was the year my father became sick. Emily listened carefully. I couldn't leave the store because I was caring for him. So who fixed the broken roof after that windstorm? Daniel answered his own question. Your father. He worked all weekend. He refused payment. Emily's eyes filled again. I didn't know. Daniel chuckled. He said the coffee was enough. He paused. 3 years later, our delivery truck broke down. Guess who spent his Saturday repairing the engine? Emily smiled through tears. My dad. He wouldn't let me pay him. Daniel reached beneath the counter and pulled out an old notebook. Every few pages contained handwritten notes. Tom fixed roof. No charge. Helped Susan during storm. Delivered supplies while Daniel cared for Dad. Repaired truck. Built shelves for community food drive. Volunteered after flood. Helped elderly neighbors. Each note ended exactly the same way. Still trying to repay kindness. Daniel looked at Emily. I stopped counting years ago. She covered her mouth. He thought he still owed you. Daniel gently shook his head. No. He simply never realized kindness earns interest. Emily couldn't hold back her tears anymore. He carried this guilt his whole life. Daniel nodded sadly. That's because your father measured debt with dollars. I measured it with character. The young woman sat quietly in one of the old wooden chairs near the counter. Daniel poured 2 cups of coffee. For the next hour they talked. Really talked. Emily learned stories about her father she had never heard. How he quietly repaired playground equipment at the elementary school before children arrived. How he shoveled elderly neighbors' sidewalks before sunrise. How he anonymously bought winter coats for local children. How he stayed after volunteer events to clean up when everyone else had gone home. He wasn't trying to become famous, Daniel said. He simply believed that if someone once helped you stand, then you should spend the rest of your life helping others stand too. Emily smiled through tears. That sounds exactly like him. Daniel reached into a storage cabinet and returned carrying an old wooden box. I've been saving something. Inside were dozens of thank you cards. Letters. Photographs. Small notes. Every one of them mentioned Thomas Carter. One handwritten card simply read. Your husband fixed our porch after the storm. He wouldn't let us pay him. Because of him, my husband, who uses a wheelchair, could safely come home again. Another letter came from a local teacher. Mr. Carter repaired every broken desk in my classroom over spring break. He said children shouldn't have to learn at broken tables. Emily carefully touched each letter. I never knew. Daniel smiled. People like your father rarely advertise their kindness. They simply keep showing up. Emily looked down at the cashier's check. So, what do I do now? Daniel thought for a long moment. Then he picked up the check. He turned it over. On the back he wrote 3 words. Already paid forward. He handed it back. I'd like you to keep this. She stared at the words. But Dad wanted me to repay you. You can. How? Daniel smiled. Someday you'll meet someone carrying a burden they shouldn't have to carry alone. Maybe it'll be a struggling student. A single parent. An elderly neighbor. A frightened child. When that day comes. He gently folded her father's letter and placed it back in her hands. Help them. And don't expect anything in return. Emily quietly cried. So that's how I repay him? Daniel nodded. No. That's how you continue him. Several months passed. Spring brought sunshine back to Maple Creek. Life settled into its familiar rhythm. One Saturday morning Daniel unlocked the hardware store and noticed something different across the street. A vacant storefront had reopened. The sign above the window read, "The Carter Community Workshop." Curious, Daniel walked over. Inside were donated tools, workbenches, shelves filled with paint, screws, lumber scraps, and repair supplies. Emily greeted him with the biggest smile he'd ever seen. "We teach people basic home repairs for free." She proudly showed him around. Single parents can borrow tools. Teenagers learn woodworking. Veterans repair bicycles. Retirees mentor young adults. And every Wednesday we fix broken furniture for families who can't afford replacements. Daniel looked around in amazement. "This is incredible." Emily smiled. "I used the $1,200. You accepted it?" She laughed. "No. I invested it." She pointed toward dozens of volunteers working together. "I figured Dad would have wanted this." Daniel's eyes became watery. He absolutely would. Near the entrance hung a framed photograph of Thomas Carter smiling beside a toolbox. Below it was a simple plaque. "Kindness is the only debt that grows smaller every time you give it away." Daniel stood silently reading those words. Visitors wandered in throughout the afternoon. Children built birdhouses. Neighbors repaired bicycles. An elderly widow learned how to replace a leaking faucet. A teenage boy fixed a broken wheelchair ramp for another family. Nobody asked who deserved help. Nobody asked what they would receive in return. They simply helped. Exactly as Tom had done. Exactly as kindness always does. That evening, just before closing, Emily walked Daniel to the door. "I still miss him every day." "I know. But now when I think about him." She looked around the busy workshop. "I don't think about what he owed. I think about everything he gave." Daniel smiled. That's the difference between a financial debt and a life well lived. As he walked home beneath the golden Oregon sunset, Daniel glanced back one last time. The workshop lights glowed warmly through the windows. Laughter echoed into the street. Hammers tapped rhythmically. Neighbors greeted strangers like old friends. One quiet act of generosity from decades earlier had never truly ended. It had simply changed hands. Sometimes we spend our lives worrying about the promises we couldn't keep. The money we couldn't repay. The opportunities we missed. But the greatest debts are rarely settled with a check or a receipt. They're repaid every time we choose compassion over convenience. Every time we lift someone who's struggling. Every time we become the answer to another person's difficult day. Because kindness doesn't disappear after it's given. It travels from one heart to another, one generation to the next, creating ripples we may never fully see. And perhaps that's the most beautiful inheritance any parent can leave behind, not wealth, not possessions, but a legacy so full of compassion that someone else chooses to carry it forward. If this story touched your heart, remember this. You may never know how far one simple act of kindness can travel. But somewhere, someday, someone just might be living a better life because you chose to care.